And when I ended up in Sudbury, it just by chance in 1982, I was photographing up in Sudbury at the Inco mines at the time. And they're now been bought by Vale from Brazil, but at that time it was still a Canadian company. And so I was up there, and I was told by a geologist there that this is the second largest nickel mine in the world. Only followed Norilsk in northern Siberia was the largest deposit of nickel, followed by Inco and Sudbury. And so by chance, one of the first places that I photographed was in Sudbury. And it was fascinating because what I recognized at that time, this is in 1982, was when you have that kind of scale, then there is a surreal aspect to it, because in many cases, we've always, like all living things, somehow draw from nature on some level to survive. We, on the other hand, draw from nature, but the thing that we have that no other living species on the planet has is a cerebral cortex and a consciousness that can both project into the future and unpack the past. And so with those tools, we've invented tools. And so now with the technological revolution, it's not that we've stopped. There's never been a point where we haven't taken from nature. It's the speed and scale of the taking that has changed. And in particular, in the last century, with the internal combustion engine, following the steam engine. And when you start looking at the mechanical advantage of the internal combustion engine and what we can now do and move in terms of material, and I attribute that to the machinery and the technological developments that we've created, that these worlds are almost, we are now almost diminished in the scale of these worlds. We are small players in the theater of our taking. And that to me was interesting because, that wasn't the past. The past, if you looked at a town, a medieval town or whatever, all the materials that built that town were probably within a ox cart, road away, like a couple of kilometers maybe, and whether the trees of the region or the rocks of the region or whatever built that town. Now we can have, our cities are built with materials from who knows where. It could be, it could be slate from India and granite from China and something from Russia. Who knows? We don't know where our materials. So we're now in this complete kind of mobilization of materials in a global market, and yet none of us really, going back to the medieval village, you could probably go and see where everybody was getting the stones, or the forest where everybody was cutting the trees for the homes that they were living in. Here we can't go back to see anything of our origins of the things around us. So it was interesting to go as a photographer and to go into those large scale, what I call ages of man, because if you think of our ages, the Stone Age, the Iron Age, the Copper Age, the Bronze Age, and then on, and now we're in the computer and biological age and entering new ages. And but of all that, all those other ages are still alive and well at scale that's breathtaking. And because we're now almost 8 billion people with mechanical advantage of these. So to go into those worlds and the biggest versions of that, of those human systems deployed in nature to harvest the things that we want, to me was a project worthy of a lifelong pursuit. And so back in the early 80s, I said, if I stick to that kind of idea and keep building this compendium, eventually, it's like a gestalt. All the individual images will mean more than any one of them will, because it's this, all these industries have been somehow captured through large format color photography around the world that show humans kind of at their kind of most creative, but also at their most destructive.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny, interested when you're talking about, you know, the Anthropocene and picturing the Anthropocene, because otherwise, you know, how do you photograph it? Well, you figured it out, Edward. You figured out how to do it. But I'm also interested, you know, given my art historical background, yeah, I've read a lot of interviews with you where you talk about in your photographs, like doing a landscape, which to me just sounds so painterly and really lovely. And also I would say, like, looking at some of your images, like say the Ferris Bushling one from Hamilton, I feel like there's a sense of everything being in focus and it almost becoming so in focus that it's kind of like an abstraction. So I was just wondering, like, with your earlier works, but then also even now looking at your current works, you know, what were your art historical references, if you have specific ones, and have they kind of changed at all, like looking at, you know, this manufactured landscapes body of work to where you are now with the Anthropocene works?
Well, and in many ways, I think in my mind, I think I often use less the idea of doing, but more making an image,
Yeah.
that versus taking an image.
Yeah.
And those are very different things. So, and the way I describe it is that and that's often how I, not to say I'm putting anybody in a different category, but if you're a kind of photojournalist and you're just on the move all the time and you're grabbing things, or if you're you know, it's this kind of taking, or if you're just casually running around and grabbing a shot because you happen to be you know, touring through Milan or whatever, and you want to, you know, photograph the Duomo. To me, that's taking images. You know, that's you're capturing as you're going along, and you're trying to quickly respond to the things that you're seeing. Whereas, you know, the difference with what I do is I'll find a subject, I'll go there, often, rarely the first time, like in this work on the Ferris Bushling and the recycling. You know, the first images I got nothing from it. I didn't even get one image that worked. I realized that I needed special, the light had to be softer, and that, you know, I decided I wanted a bigger camera. I went with an 8x10 camera. So I wanted higher resolution to make and I also, to make these images, to get to the right height of these piles, I needed to get higher. I needed to be about 10 feet. So I bought this really big oversized tripod that I can put my 8x10 on, with a ladder that I can walk up behind it. And then, you know, and then you kind of wait for the right light and go back time and time again until you start finding it. And then you make these compositions. And in many ways, when you shoot 8x10, and this is, you know, I've been shooting 8x10, you know, even from the 80s, when you shoot an 8x10, which is 8 inches by 10 inches, that used to be what a whole roll of 36 millimeter film was. Because if you got an 8x10 contact, that's the whole roll of 36. Well, I'm doing that amount of, you know, data, that amount of resolution in one shot. And at that time, I mean, you know, even back in, you know, this is in the 90s, you know, a sheet of film was like $10, and then to process it was $10, and make a contact. So it was like $30 to make a shot, and I'd always do two. So, you know, $1990, it would cost me like $60 to make one picture, which would be like in today's dollars, probably like $180.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a commitment. So to me, it was almost, you know, by the time I took the picture, I focused and refocused it. I've thought about it. I've been up there, been, you know, tweaking it, and I didn't have anything that I can test it with, like a Polaroid. So I had to really make sure my light meters were good, to make sure that my shutter and all the speeds and everything were properly calibrated. So again, it was a real skill set to do it. So and I was also really interested in, you know, the kind of abstract expressionist movement that had really run its course. It just run its course as a painting, and, you know, the Jackson Pollock type of, you know, all overness and the flattening of space, the spatial flattening. And I like that idea of being able to represent the world almost as a canvas, where every square inch of it is somehow dealt with. So to me, it was, once I found a potential for that kind of an image, it didn't matter if the light wasn't right that day. I'd go back 2, 3, 4 times to get the right light, because the chance of finding those kinds of things is much harder than finding the conditions for to capture those things. So, and so in the making of an image, that's what I'm often saying, is that, you know, it's an intentional thing. It isn't by chance. I wanted to do this work. I figured out the kind of where to stand and what films to use. Like, and that also, like, I used to use Kodak film before I just did this project, and then I was testing some other films. So I would shoot like 3 or 4 different films with the same subject, and I found that the AGFA film that at that time was the AGFA 100 ASA daylight film, had this incredible reaction, a relationship to rust colors. They just became alive. So then I you know, all of a sudden it's kind of like moving from, you know, oils to acrylics. That it was you know, this film and this subject, you know, came together, you know, beautifully. And then what I learned about rust colors and from doing this project, I then applied when I went to do the shipbreaking work. And then I again used AGFA film really on those 2 projects. And then I used Kodak all the other times. So, or sometimes I used Fuji when I went to do the refineries. I found all those steel pipes and all of that looked better on Fuji film. So I would often do a whole series of paper film tests to get to the point where, that combination and that subject under this lighting condition works great. Now I go back looking for those lighting conditions. So it is, as I said, it's not something that happens by chance. It's something that you kind of create. And to me, that was one of the beauties and the things I loved about the large format camera. The 8x10 and the 4x5 cameras were this kind of slowing down, this very methodical and very deliberate and conscious way of making an image that you don't get when you're walking down a street or with an iPhone or with your 35. It was just a whole other way of working, you know, and I like that way of working because it really brought me down to this level. Some days, as an example, I remember going to Italy, and the light conditions weren't great, and I was trying to, like, the first time I went to the quarries, and I had this 8x10 camera, and I wanted to do. I walked and went and drove and looked and walked for 2 full days, did not take 1 picture. Tons of stuff to look at, but it wasn't perfect, you know. And so, and then when I finally found the perfect thing, I shot it. You know, it was a winning image. And then once you get your first image and you have that kind of bar that you set for yourself, they came easier. But making that first picture is always, to me, that's the kind of breakthrough. And when you get the first one, it leads you to the next one slowly. But it is, again, a very patient and you know, very thoughtful process, because you're committing real dollars and real you know, skill sets to try and make it work. And you know, just focusing for 1 image may take me, and getting it all right could take a half hour just to get that 1 image ready to take a picture.
Yeah, which makes sense. It's funny when the way that you're talking about it now, and you talk about taking an image. It's funny because it actually sounds like extraction, which, you know, is also a theme that's so prevalent, you know, in your work. And you talked about shipbreaking for a minute. So, you know, one thing when I look at like the bodies of work that we're showing at AGW, what's interesting looking at those specific images, you know, is the role and the scale of people, of actual human bodies as they're depicted, you know, in your photographs. Because, you know, you're clearly documenting these kind of human incursions into the landscapes. But it's really interesting to me, you know, how and when you choose to kind of include or omit, you know, people from your photographs. So, you know, I just kind of want to know, like, how and why do you make the choice to opt into depicting people, bodies as a subject in your photos versus when you just want to focus on the landscape?
Well, I mean, sometimes it happens by chance. In Bangladesh, this is a picture in Bangladesh, and because there were 25,000 workers on those beaches breaking ships, it's actually hard to take a picture without people in it. or it's hard to clear this. But at the same time, I thought that the people in the shipwrecking work played a pivotal role, because when you see the figure in the landscape and then you see the ship beside it, it really oftentimes, they're positioned so you really get to see the scale of these ships, because we understand human scale, and then all of a sudden, wow, there it is. It's, you really, how diminished we are. And for me, it really occurred to me, and I kind of first saw that, in 1982 I did INCO, and then in 1983 I went to a kind of a 4-month tour of North America, and I ended up outside of Salt Lake City at Bingham Valley, and it was a big copper mine. It's Kennecott copper mine, and when I got there and I saw the scale of what was happening, I photographed it, and it was a very successful, I think, image of that pit. It was one of the biggest pits I ever photographed. And it occurred to me in a way that, that if you go back, and I had studied a bit of art history and, the Kantian notion of the sublime, but the sublime was basically nature and its omnipresent force. So if you looked at the Moby Dick story, or Turner, and the ship at sea and being swallowed by gale force winds, it was us and our small little ship, swallowed by sea, diminished by the forces of nature, and we were in awe and an awe and respect and a sense of grandeur and overpowering it. And to me, that was like a romantic, notion of the sublime 200 years ago. And then when I saw that mine, and I'm looking at it, and they're removing 500,000 tons of material every day, and you looked at the trucks and the things in there, and the the across the top of it was 3 miles across, and it was a mile deep, in kilometers, like 5 and 2 kilometers almost, in terms of scale. And you look at a train or a school bus that was driving workers into that area, and you see that in the picture, and all of a sudden you go like, holy cow, how big. So we are actually, to me, it was the new sublime is the technical revolution, that we are dwarfed within our own worlds that we create. And so, when you stand in the middle of a city, I remember the first time I was in St. Catharines, and I would look across Lake Ontario, and I could see the towers, the IMPA, CIBC tower, and all those towers. I remember I think I was 17, was the first time I got into Commerce Court, and I looked at all the towers, and remember how I felt. And all of a sudden, I'm, these things I saw from across the lake, I'm now in the midst of them. And there was this kind of profound feeling of, wow, like, look at the scale of this. And also it made me think of, gosh, there must be places in nature where it's the reverse of this breathtaking scale of holes in the ground to build these things, that there's a yin to the yang. And that was also an early kind of, well, how do I find the diametrically opposed force of those buildings in the natural landscape. So that was another kind of, the big metropolitan city was another way to really encourage me, or at least to get me to think of scale as a key component to the work throughout this kind of lifelong project.
Yeah, it's interesting. So AGW has titled the show that we're doing Anthropocene Emerging, because it does photograph, that shows those photographs, that body of work that you sort of are doing now leading up to the Anthropocene project. And, you've matured a lot as an artist since the photographs in the exhibition that we're opening soon, that we'll be showing. But I'm just wondering if you could talk a bit about, especially for the people who did see your show at the AGO and your recent work, how did some of this body of work that we're showing plant the seed for some of the stuff you're doing now? Like, kind of what's been kind of the through line, and what was your sort of curiosity there, and has it changed at all in terms of your curiosity now as an artist?
Yeah, I think, again, going back to the theme of scale, that was always interesting. And then, and I continued shooting, and a lot from the ground. And then I kept getting more and more kind of inventive as to how to get higher. because what I found is that when you shoot, and mines and quarries gave an automatic high platform to look down, because you're looking into a bowl basically, but it's a huge scale bowl, and you're standing on the edge of it, and you can tilt down the edge, and you can tilt down, and you can fill the frame from bottom up. And a lot of my images, if you look at them, the bottom of the frame starts at quite a distance from the camera. It's not a natural thing you can find, but the reason I could find it is I'd be on a ledge on the opposite side that looked very much like in this quarry, like the ledge on the other side, but I'd have my camera and I'd be able to, start at the bottom that's already, 100 or 80 feet away from the camera. And then the most distant thing at the very top is, at infinity. So these things offered these kind of high kind of aerial platforms with, again, with a vantage point where you don't have the normal lead-in of a lot of images. If you stand on a road, or if you stand on a sidewalk or in your home, and whether you're 5'5" or 6 foot, that's the point of view that you have. And the world breaks away, with a slightly wide angle lens, like most, iPhones are slightly wide angle now. And that's the way the world breaks away. And we're very used to seeing the world captured that way, but it has to do with our human height. And it has to do with the width of the lens. Here, I'm often using longer lenses, telephoto lenses, and I'm standing across from things and shooting, and I'd have a whole range of lenses. So I travel with a lot of lenses because I can't always pick where I stand. And these images are really interesting because even when I would compose them, if I was to stand like even 2 feet to the right or left, it just falls apart. These things are interesting because they seem to work at a particular spot. And it was something that was uncanny, because you think, oh, a foot wouldn't make a difference, but it does. It's the relationships that happen, even at that distance. And it took me a while to understand how important and critical, and I used to spend a lot more time like moving my camera 6 inches at a time at something that's way far away out there. But that was, to me, that was interesting, and that gave that flattening of space. And I also like middle ground. So I started shooting and I started renting bucket lifts, that you fix, that they would give me like 80 feet. So I used to go and start renting them and learned how to use them, or drag one behind on a trailer with a hitch and in a 4-wheel drive to go to places. And I started shooting with that a lot because, I could afford that. And then I had a chance in 2006, I got a call to do a project in Australia, and Western Australia in particular, around Perth. And I looked at the region, and I knew about it, but I knew that Perth was very much like, and Australia was very much like Canada. It was a former British colony, but it's also built on resource extraction, mining in particular. And most of the mines were Western Australia. And I said, well, I'd be interested. And they wanted to see if as an artist, would I be interested in doing a project on mining in Western Australia? And I said, well, I don't want to do more of what I've done, but what I'd like to do, if possible, is shoot it from a different perspective, i.e. from a helicopter. So if you guys can, find a budget, rent me some helicopters, and that became a shoot. And then I ended up practicing and figuring out before I went, how to get aerial shots. And I tried 4x5, and that didn't work. My 4x5 film, my large format, because I wanted that quality. It was too wasteful. It was too hard to compose. I tried 2 1/4 camera with film, a really good Hasselblad with really high resolution film. Didn't like that quality either. And eventually I tried a digital, at that time, a Hasselblad with a really good back, a digital back, and the Hasselblad lenses. And voila, bingo, it was better than anything I do with film. And that began, and then I bought a Hasselblad with a digital back. It started with a 40 megapixel back, and that's where I began. And then I bought a 50, and then I bought a 60, and then I bought 100, and now I sold all of that and bought a 150 megapixel phase 1 camera, which is the latest state-of-the-art camera. So I've been kind of moving along digital along the way, but all of a sudden I can gyro stabilize this 40 megapixel Hasselblad in a helicopter and be flying along, and it would feel like I'm taking a shot with my 4x5 on a tripod.
Wow.
but I'm moving through space and being shaken and jumping around. But I was able to stabilize the whole thing and start using a helicopter as I would as if shooting off of a tripod, and getting the kind of same size prints, which are 40 by 50. And the other thing, like, as you can see, when you see the prints, in the gallery, I shoot for that. Everything after that is a surrogate experience, whether it's a book or a magazine reproduction, or whether it's online, or a poster or anything else is not. I shoot to the size of the pictures on the wall. I go through all that trouble so that when you're in front of those images, there's something about the resolution, the kind of, I call it the 6-inch test. So you can put your face 6 inches away from it, and you can see every detail and all the writing on the walls and the person so the details are that second reading of these images. And that's why I go to the trouble of an 8x10 or a 4x5. So when I realized I can do that same kind of resolution from a helicopter with a digital camera, that wasn't possible with a film camera, I said, aha, and that's the first time I moved to digital, because it did a better job than my 4x5 could do. And then that was in 2006. So it's been almost a 15-year journey in aerial work. And I shot both land and aerial, but aerial always being a component. And then around 2010, I discovered drones, and it was very early drone days. And I found one guy who could put my Hasselblad on a drone, and they were working for film industry and putting film cameras. And I said, we can get a film camera on a drone, then you can put my Hasselblad on a stills camera. And they did. And all of a sudden in 2010, I'm photographing with my Hasselblad with a signal coming down to a monitor and able to trigger it myself. So I was composing at 1,000 feet away from me with the same camera that I shoot from a helicopter, and shooting and being able to control the whole composition of it precisely. In fact, more so than a helicopter, because you can lock a drone in space, and then I can kind of slowly find my frame and go click. Whereas in a helicopter, you're just constantly moving. You can't sit still. And if you do sit fully still in a helicopter, it really chatters a lot, and it's really hard to stabilize. So the pilots always want to be moving at least 50 to 20 kilometers per hour. So you're never static in the air, and it's always having to sweep back again and try again if you didn't quite get it. But no two images are alike when you're in a helicopter, and that's why you shoot a lot. So I realized, again, to make it feel like a conscious picture taken from a tripod, but you're at 800 or 1,000 feet, I realized how hard that was too. But digital allowed me to shoot and just delete what didn't work to get to the one I wanted. And it was a whole different way of working. So in my digital projects, I think for 100 images, for instance, in the water book, I did a count of how many aerial photographs I took for the 100 images. It was 26,000. Wow. So it's a different way of working. It's just, so you just think differently, you work differently. So I come back off of a shoot and I'm trying to get 1 or 2 images, but I shot 400 to get that one. So it's just, again, just as hard as, the 8x10, it's a different way. It's just a different way to get at it. But it had to make it feel like that was as if I had, intended to be there. I'd slowly compose the image and put it together so that every part of the image is contributing to the whole thing. So there isn't a kind of it isn't like a corner that I didn't consider or that didn't work out or whatever. So in many ways, it was trying to take that same thinking with the 8x10 and applying it to aerial photography.
Interesting, and when you're talking too about the number of thousands of images that you end up getting when you use a drone, it does, seem to me like there's even a parallel with the domestic photography we're taking every day. I mean, when I think back when we made the transition, in our homes from the film camera to the disposable camera to now Instagram, and it's like the value, you can take 100 pictures of the same thing, like really, really quickly. So it changes the way that you kind of, that you think about images when, I don't want to say they're almost disposable, because that's not what I mean, but that you can do so many at once. It changes the value, I think, of it.
Well, the cost of making an image is zero.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas, you know, versus like when I was saying about 8x10, the cost of making a picture back then was $60, which is today's dollars, probably $150. So that's a very big difference in terms of how you approach making a picture. But I think the lessons that I learned from making those kinds of pictures, you know, at that kind of commitment level, you know, gave me the discipline and the kind of ability to kind of use a new technology as if it were an 8x10, but there's no way I'd be able to shoot 26,000 8x10 frames. You know.
Definitely not. I don't know how much fun that would be. I wanted to ask just like 2 last questions, because I know we're running out of time, but of some of the images that we're showing, you know, I am curious, looking at shipbreaking and looking at some of the refineries and the recycling. I'm just curious, like technically, of the ones you remember, like, is there one that was really difficult, and like logistically from a project management? Because I think one thing that people don't necessarily think about when they look at your images is like just even how difficult it must be to access some of these locations that you're photographing. So just wondering if you have like memorable technical and or memorable, you know, logistically project wise.
Well, there's one project image that it was done after a couple. It was actually done probably around 2012. So I started doing a water project and looking at water as an idea and photographing human transformation of landscape. So the Three Gorges Dam in China, the largest dam ever built by humans, and still will probably remain the biggest. I don't think anybody will ever build, any country will build one bigger than that again. It was, you know, by far almost 2 times the biggest dam ever attempted. So I wanted to go to China to photograph that, but when I got there, I found that there was there was this fish farm off of the coast of Fujian province. And again, because I'm researching, you know, how we use water, and this was like and these fish farms were the biggest, you know, fish farms in the world. And I think if you look at aquaculture and the human kind of growing of, whether it's, you know, salmon in pens off the coast of BC, or just, you know, or our own homegrown or grown fish. China was 70% of all you know, aqua farming was done in China, and this area had about 40% of all of that. So it was almost 40% of all the kind of biomass of fish that we farm was coming from that area. So, and that same research is, there's no way I can show it. I was walking along it and all the vantage points, and then, but there's no civil aviation that you can rent a helicopter or anything in China. But there was a military base, and I started negotiating with the military base, and they had a big helicopter, and they would rent it to me, but I had to commit to a 5-hour window minimum, and it was $5,000 an hour. Oh no, that was more. It was like, anyway, I think the whole thing was for 5 hours was $75,000, and for 5 hours, and it was, you picked a window no matter what, and the place was mostly fogged in all the time. So if it was fogged in, you know, I'd have that 5 hours and I wouldn't be able to see anything because it would be fogged in. So I looked at that and I really wanted that shot, and that's one of the reasons I started investigating drones. So when I came back so it took me 2 years to figure out how to get a drone working perfectly properly, and then to get the operator. And there was 2 guys. There's one that operated what's called the gimbal, which is where the camera sits, and it's like your tripod head to direct it. And the other guy operated the drone itself. It's on my website. It actually shows it in a video called "Where I Stand," that talks about the techniques. And then I had to get all of that stuff through clearance into China, like a big drone, the cases of drones and all of that. And I managed to convince them, and then I managed to get the drone and shoot that picture. But then I also was able to take it onto the the Three Gorges Dam and take pictures with it there. And then we also did film footage with it there as well. So we put the film camera and the stills camera. So that would probably be my most elaborate kind of technical, because I had to learn a lot of stuff. It took me 2 years before I can return and say, now I can make that picture.
Yeah.
So it was like this commitment to a picture that, and then you start developing. I probably spent less than the $75,000 for the rental of the helicopter doing it as well. So, so it was this kind of necessity is the mother of invention. So it was this problem. And then, me working with my team, and we just kept pounding away at it and finding the people that could help us figure out how to do that. And that was, I think, one of my more kind of interesting solutions, solutions.
Wow. So I kind of wanted to end our talk today, because unfortunately our time is almost up. Thinking about where we are now, COVID-19, you're clearly not able to travel and access, a lot of these areas the same way you once did. And, I did read your piece that you wrote on Earth Day, the Globe and Mail, thinking about, looking at the impact of human activity on the world, and even thinking about how COVID-19, it's happening because we're encroaching on these natural habitats, often for the purposes, of extraction. So I was just wondering where we are right now with COVID-19, like how it's shaped your photography practice and personal views at the moment, given that travel and movement isn't the way that it used to be. And like, how are you feeling about capturing this moment in time in terms of the Anthropocene and where we are now?
Yeah, it's interesting because I do believe there is a direct correlation between our human expansion and going deeper and deeper into the natural world, and actually one of the very first city I went to in China in 2002 was Wuhan. And it was interesting because I arrived at Wuhan. I had to stop in Shanghai and then took a Shanghai flight to Wuhan. And I got there and I hadn't actually heard of the city, to be honest with it, before I got there. It was a guy, he said, I heard about it, of course, when my fixer said, meet me in Wuhan. And it was like a city at that time of over 6 million people. And I said, wow, this is bigger than Toronto, or at that time it was almost New York. That was 20 years ago. And it's like, I've never heard of this. And then there was like, of the 50 cities with more than 1 million people, I think 32 at that time were in China, and cities you hadn't heard of by and large. But Wuhan was one of the key reasons why they built the Three Gorges Dam, because it was always subject to flooding. So when the images of Wuhan were coming, and I did go to the wet markets at that time, and it was kind of wild. I kind of went, whoa, this is crazy, and it was just like all these exotic animals were coming through these wet markets. And so I was, and I guess it didn't feel right then either. It felt like, wow, we shouldn't be eating bats and, civet cats and all these wild animals or pangolins, or, there was, these were all exotics, and these exotic, wet markets were kind of known in the Wuhan region. So then, so when this happened, I remember in November when they locked down Wuhan, and I said, and at that time, it was a city of 12 million people, or it's like 10 to 12 million people, something like that. And I went, wow, I just couldn't get my head around the fact that you can shut a city down. Little did I know you can shut the whole world economy down. But I was thinking, that will never happen here, they'll just shut it down.
Here we are.
Here we are
doing a Zoom conversation instead of being at the gallery. I mean, I'm not mad about it, because I think there's like 100 people here. So I think, stuff like this might be an interesting start,
Right. Yeah. So it was, and I think that, if anything, that the last 40 years where I'm looking at the scale of humans in a way, and that taking, and that we've kind of had we put extraordinary pressure on the natural world. So as our success, the the other side of that is that nature is losing ground, is that the biodiversity is suffering, the populations of fish and seafood in the oceans is depleting, the forests are shrinking, we're in a period of extraordinary depletion of natural resources, and then having to go further and further into nature. So now, in a way, this kind of jumping of a virus from, and they assume it's from a bat, into to a human, and then that kind of transmission that it has allowed for is a kind of, all of a sudden, it's a reversal of fortunes, in that now we're pinned by nature. But it is, I think, in many ways, that a kind of a reckoning, or at least a wake-up call to us, and whether it happened in China or whether it happens somewhere in Africa, or whether it happens in South America or in the United States, that it could jump. I mean, but again, it depends on culture and the kinds of closeness to animals. But yeah, we can have jumps happening in different places. But I think it is a real, and it also is a real kind of, I think, indicator of how we can adapt and how we can shift very rapidly to deal with a danger. And I think there's a real lesson in this response, human response to a virus, that hopefully translates into the next greater existential threat, which is climate change.
Yeah. Which
is just, so this is, I think, in a way, a dry run for climate change. Now, it may not be as pervasive, and one of the reasons why this is such a historic moment is, I think every human being on the planet has been affected by it on some level, whether you're the tribes in the Amazon, or you're some of the last, hunter-gatherers in Papua New Guinea. Everybody's dealt with it on some level. Mm-hmm. So so everybody on the planet, every human being who's conscious and able to understand what's happening at this time, will have a story from this time. Will have been affected by this time, which is the first time in my life that anything has happened that has affected directly everybody. I mean, we all heard about 9/11. It seemed like an event that, but not everybody was affected by it. The big recession of 2008 was a kind of like a seismic thing that we all felt, but it was an economic thing. This is a health risk thing, which is more like climate change, because climate change is health oriented and life oriented too. I think that there may be, the silver linings may be that we are capable of, rapid deployment and a rapid shifting in our behaviors to respond to a threat. And if we can just kind of begin to learn to apply that to the greater threat, and also I would think that the next time a virus looks like it's about to let loose, I think that will send a 10-alarm fire. If you look at the trillions of dollars lost of economy, and because everything was ticking along kind of pretty good, if you look at the kind of cost of what just happened as a result of not containing it at its source. And Ebola's, I mean, if they would have come, that's like 40% of people who get, or over 50% die. Now, if that were to run loose, the only thing that probably saved us in Ebola was the last bad one coming out of, I think it was West Africa, is the fact that, you didn't shed the virus until you were 2 or 3 days ill, and the illness really showed very, very specifically. So somebody could look at them and say, you've got it. And then they know within a day or two, you can now spread it, but they were able to contain it. This one is a toughie, because you don't even have to have it, and you can be a spreader, and you don't have any symptoms, and it's highly contagious. It's kind of like, it makes us all kind of like, who's the bad one in the room, right? We're,
And it's not, it's, you know, it's, you know, it'd be interesting to see like 2 years from now, how much more we understand about it. And, you know, maybe at that point, Edward, you'll figure out a way to photograph it.
Yeah, I went back to nature. I went back to looking
Yeah.
at nature, and and so I was up north isolating, and I'm just opening a show at the Nicholas Mativier
Yeah, I was
Gallery.
just about to ask if you had anything you wanted to plug to everybody as we close. Yeah.
Yeah, well, September 3rd, Nick Mativier Gallery, and I'm using this camera, my latest camera, which is really incredible. It's actually exceeds the quality of my 8x10, but it's digital. And I was doing this new technique called focus stacking. So when I was up there in the country, I was isolating. So I went back to my roots of looking at nature, and I was looking again deeply at again, trying to do that all overness and the flattening of space, but it was that time, you know, before leaves and just, you know, in the spring where you get and a lot of dogwood reds in there. So I was looking at nature kind of as that we are part of it, and that, you know, I was looking at the very, very intricate fabric of all the branches of trees and leaves and brush, all woven together in a way that reminded me of you know, having seen images of neural nets in our brain now that they know what they look like, and you know, and the structures of our nervous system and the structures of our vascular systems. And you look at nature, and it's the same system, it's the same branching, it's the same way in which it delivers life, you know, in nature. And it's just the tree that interacts with the air that feeds, you know, that absorbs carbon dioxide and feeds oxygen back in, and that this is an ever, I mean, if we don't make it as a species, I believe that this will still be here. This is a more ever present kind of that resilient nature, that those, you know, structures will spawn something yet again if we somehow mess up, that this is going to be the persistent life on the planet. And so I did this whole series called Natural Order, and it's going to be a limited edition portfolio that we've sold a bunch of them, and when I was began doing this in March, and thinking that the visual arts, and I come from the visual arts, is going to be, you know, hit hard. So the AGO, so we're doing a thing with the AGO and Ryerson Image Center. They both get $100,000 each to buy emerging artists and mid-career artists, and hopefully get a chance to, you know, help in filling in some areas that might be underrepresented. So in terms of their collections. So
that's so generous. That sounds really great. Oh, Edward, that's wonderful. Edward Burtynsky, it's been such a pleasure and an honor to get to interview you today. Thank you so much. Also a pleasure and an honor to be opening the show of all the prints you generously donated to us. Really exciting to show them again, especially given that you've been showing so much internationally with new bodies of work. I think it's really cool to kind of go back and, you know, and look at some of your older work and think about how it connects to what you're doing now, and all the conversations that we're having, you know, about the environment. So I just want to thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And yeah, Nicholas Mativier, going to check your show out in September for sure. And to everybody who came today, thank you so much. If you wanted to sign up for our email list to find out about more events like this that we're going to be doing over Zoom, check out gw.ca. You could also make a donation there if you like, if you enjoyed attending the talk today, or to get a membership. So yeah, everyone, thank you so much. And yeah, also if you follow our social media channels and our emails, you'll become one of the first to know, maybe just after Edward, when his show, the exact date that it will open. So
thanks, Jen. Thanks, Jennifer.
I promise you'll know first, Edward, before everybody that attended.
Right. Oh, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.